Salute, ladies. Today we are going to do chapter 31 in Wheelock's Latin. There are two concepts that we need to talk about in this chapter. We need to look at the irregular verb fero, fere, tuli latum, and we need to look at another subjunctive subordinate clause, the cum clauses. Okay. We're going to tackle the irregular verb fero first. This is actually the first of a number of irregular verbs that we're going to encounter between chapter 31 and the end of the book. So we're going to start looking at some of the more common irregular verbs and how they conjugate in order to give you guys a good idea of what you will be encountering in actual Latin, especially if you move on next year into Latin. So the first thing you should know about fero is that it is an irregular third conjugation verb. Important to remember that it's third conjugation for when you are trying to conjugate the tenses and voices that are not irregular. So they're going to follow the regular third conjugation rules. The only irregular forms for this verb are in the present tense, okay? The present indicative, the present infinitive, and the present imperative. The future and the imperfect form the way regular third conjugation futures and imperfects form. Okay. The third and fourth principal parts obviously look quite different. Tuli, latum look quite different from fero, fere. But anyway, the perfect system forms regularly. Remember, perfect, pluperfect, future perfect, active and passive are completely regular for all verbs. So regardless of conjugation or regardless how messed up their present system might be. Another little interesting fact about this is that this is the final third conjugation verb that forms the singular imperative without the E. So remember, the four verbs that do this are sorry, my mouth gets ahead of me. Duke, deek, fock, and fair. So this is the fair of Duke, deek, fock, and fair. Okay? All right, so let's look at how these conjugate. The present active indicative, you will notice that the I falls out of some of these forms. So the first person singular is fero. As a third conjugation verb, you would expect for this to be feris with an I, but it has fallen out, so it's fers. So fero, fers, fert. Feramus, I stays in. Fertus, I falls out. Ferunt. Okay, so really it's the second and third singular, second plural that you have to look out for. The imperative, also slightly irregular. Again, we have our singular fair, you know, the singular command to carry. But even the plural forms irregularly for this particular verb in the imperative. You would expect it to be ferrete with that I, but instead it's just ferte. And again, this second principal part, this present infinitive, this present active infinitive, does not look the way we would expect it to look with an ERE at the end as a third conjugation verb. Instead, the E has fallen out, so it's just fere. Okay. The passive is also going to be a little irregular, so feror. That's what you expect. But again, you would expect a short E here in the present passive indicative if this were a regular third conjugation. Unfortunately, it is irregular. So feror, ferus, fertor, feramus, ferimini, feruntor. There you go. The present passive infinitive actually does follow the rule. It just looks a little weird, which is that you remove the final E and replace it with a long I, and that is how you go from the present active infinitive to the passive. So ferre, to carry, ferry, to be carried. So there you go. Think like a ferry that would take you across the river. All right, the second concept that we need to address in this chapter are cum clauses. Cum clauses are a type of subjunctive subordinate clause, so it should go on that sheet that I gave you, the list of the subjunctive subordinate clauses. There are actually 4 cum clauses, and one of them takes the indicative, and then the other 3 are formed with a subjunctive verb and therefore are subjunctive subordinate clauses. So let's talk about cum clauses. I understand that up until now, for 31 chapters and 2.5 years of Latin, you have been used to cum being a preposition that translates with. Cum can also be a conjunction, and when it is used as a conjunction, it can translate as when, since, or although, depending on what type of cum clause it is, okay? So the conjunction cum sets up a cum clause. Pretty straightforward. There are 4 types of cum clauses total. There's the temporal, the circumstantial, the causal, and the adversative. The temporal cum clause is the only one where the verb is going to be in the indicative. So it is a subordinate clause. It's not a subjunctive subordinate clause, but it's a subordinate clause. The temporal cum clause is. When you have cum plus the indicative in your cum clause, the cum is going to translate when. Okay, so it tells you the temporal aspect, so when something has happened, obviously from tempus temporis. When the verb is in the subjunctive and you have a subjunctive subordinate clause with your cum clause, you can translate the cum either when, but that's giving you the circumstance under which the main action of the main clause happens, the action of the main clause happens. You can translate it since, and that gives you, it's a causal cum clause, and that gives you the cause of why the action of the main verb takes place, of the main clause takes place. Or you can translate it although. That's an adversative cum clause, and that tells you what happened despite the action of the action in the main clause. When the sentence is an adversative cum clause, so when the sentence has an adversative cum clause in it, there's a word in the main clause that might tip you, to give you a little tip, a little help into recognizing it as adversative, and that is tamen, nevertheless. So although such and such happened, adversative cum clause, main clause, nevertheless, such and such happened. So I have 4 examples on the next page to give you an example of each of these types of cum clauses. Cum puella stulta virum bellum vide bit, protinus eum amabit. So we have our indicative verb here, future indicative, vide bit, with the cum clause. So we know this is going to be a temporal cum clause, right? And so when the foolish girl will see the pretty man, she will immediately love him. Okay, so when will she immediately love him? What's the time of that the main clause is going to happen? When the foolish girl sees the pretty boy, the pretty man. So that's telling us literally when this is going to happen. Now, as we move forward into the subjunctive cum clauses, we're going to need to figure out whether these are going to be circumstantial, causal, or adversative. In the second example, cum hoc malum fecissent ad te fugit. So we know our main clause is fugit. She fled, or he fled, ad te, to you. Now, we know that what the subordinate cum clause says is when, or excuse me, I guess it says he had done this bad thing. He fled to you. So what's happening here? What information is the cum clause giving us about the main clause? In my opinion, it's giving us the circumstances as to why he fled to you. So I would call this a circumstantial cum clause, and I would translate that cum when. When he had done this bad thing, he fled to you. Okay? Our third example, cum hoc sciret patuit eos iuvare. So what is the main clause? What is the main action of the sentence? He was able to help them. Okay, he was able to help them. So what information are we getting in the cum clause? He knew this thing. So I would say that the knowing this thing is the cause of him being able to help them. So I would say this is a causal cum clause and translate that cum since. Since he knew this thing, he was able to help them. The last example, cum illum ducam fortem diligeremus, tamen eum iuvare non pateramus, okay? The tamen in the main clause is tipping you off that this is probably adversative, okay? So our main sentence is, nevertheless, we were not able to help him, right? And then we have our cum clause. What's happening in here is we respect or we esteem that brave leader. Nevertheless, we were not able to help him. So I think this is an adversative cum clause. Although we respected that brave leader, nevertheless, we were not able to help him. Okay, come into class tomorrow with all of your questions, and I hope you have a lovely night. Walete, ladies.